estimate that going to about 60% of the newly lowered licensed rate would yield about $20 million in savings.
Thank you.
Okay. So then turning to page 8, summarizing the options before you, I think I'd just like to pause and recognize that there's no question that any of these reductions will have, as you called it, Senator Leno, human consequences. There really is not a way to generate notable amounts of savings here without affecting families, without affecting providers, without affecting children. So it's really, if you need to generate savings from these programs, thinking about how do you prioritize them. And they're difficult choices, and I think, as was discussed this morning, we need to be honest about that.
Through the chair.
Yes, Senator Simonian.
I mean this just straight out. The short version is the proposal is to provide less help to fewer people. Is that it?
Correct. That's the only way you get savings.
All right.
Yep.
I just we got a lot of data in front of us, and I just think we ought to sort of cut to the chase on some of this. And I understand the economic imperatives that are driving the recommendation, but I just think trying to cast it any other way for purposes of the conversation is to be wide of the mark. We're talking about providing appreciably less help to appreciably fewer people, and that's where we are. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
I don't think anyone was doubting that, unfortunately.
So here on page 8, it just summarizes. It's really texty. It's more for your reference, but it just summarizes
good summary.
What we have discussed already. The governor's 3 made proposals and some options that we have offered for ways that you could tweak that. Turning to page 9 are 3 additional options that the governor hasn't recommended or hasn't put forth.
Make up the over $200 million that you have suggested we not take.
Correct. So the first is looking at a proposal that the legislature actually adopted last year, which is, again, if you're looking at prioritizing services with limited dollars, if you're making reductions, how do you prioritize services? This first one would be prioritizing services for younger children and looking to our existing school-based after-school programs for some of the older children. So last year, in part of the March budget, the legislature adopted a proposal to eliminate subsidized childcare for 11 and 12-year-olds who need care during traditional school hours, maintaining a piece of it for those who need care during non-traditional hours whose parents can prove that they're working in evenings or weekends, and then prioritizing slots in our after-school programs, existing after-school programs for those who would be displaced. So that's one option you could pursue. Again, it was adopted in March and then rescinded in June based on the higher revenue assumptions last year. The second option is looking at parent fees. This is the amount that the state requires parents to contribute to help pay for their care, and right now it's on a sliding scale. The less you may earn, the less you have to pay in fees. The more you earn, the more you pay in fees. So looking at across other states, it seems that California's fees are on the lower side, so this could be one way of generating additional revenue, increase fees, and have that be an offset for the state's contribution. Again, these are very low-income families, and it needs to be acknowledged that any requirement that they pay more of their paycheck towards child care will be very difficult for them. And then third, an option to explore, as was discussed this morning with CalWORKs, is imposing time limits for the total number of years that a family might be able to receive subsidized child care. We don't currently have time limits in California. If a family remains income eligible, they can receive subsidized child care all the way till their child turns 13. We could look at capping the number of years that a family receives that service. That is done in other states. The problem here is that we don't currently collect good data on how long families have been receiving care, so it might be difficult to implement this and achieve savings from this change immediately. It might have to be an out-year policy change that's made, and then we start collecting the data, and it could yield savings in the out years.
Well, again, it's very helpful, I think, for us to have some other way of thinking about hitting whatever the mark we decide we need to hit, whether it's the governor's $400 million or somewhere south of that. So thank you for the good organization of it. It's a little easier to digest.
I'm glad. That's always our intent.
Sure.
So page 10 is just, as we did with CalWORKs, some illustrative budget packages, some options you could pursue, again, depending on the savings target you're hoping to hit. Given the reductions in recent years, we would understand if the legislature didn't want to cut these programs as deeply. However, given the magnitude of the budget problem, which seems to possibly be more than we might have thought it was a couple of months ago. We understand you may need to go as deep as the governor. So we offer some options for this. We think that these example packages strike a better balance of prioritizing care. The governor really picked the goal of prioritizing families who are working as the highest priority. We think there are other priorities you could look at: age of child, quality of care, lower income families. There are other kind of priorities you could focus on. So that was our intent here.
Is it accurate to conclude that these three other options you're providing, the age limits, the parent fees, and the time limits, are preferable to, and finding approximately $200 million of savings somewhere among those three, a better idea than the additional couple $100 million to be saved in the administration's proposal related to work requirements, because you just think those stringent work requirements are untenable? That's what
I'm not sure that we would say that they're untenable. It's just a very dramatic policy change to decide that supporting child care for families who are pursuing education or training is no longer a goal of the state. So because that was such a big policy change, we wanted to offer some different approaches to that that might balance some other goals. But you'll see some of the other pieces of the governor's proposal on income limits and reimbursement rates here. But
specific to the work requirements, given you've suggested we not accept them, you've given us some options. You think piecing together some packages of options is better than these work requirements?
As part of this alternative for you to consider, we thought that thinking about it, maybe a 2-year cap on education rather than a full elimination of eligibility based on that, might be a less dramatic policy change for you to consider.
But significantly less savings, so
Correct.
You've directed us elsewhere.
You'd have to make it up from other changes.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. Very good.
So turning to page 11, again, this is moving away from budget reductions now into the restructuring proposal. You could, again, we think, do this independent, make these decisions independently of the budget reduction decisions that you make. So as Mr. Schweitzer mentioned, the goal is consolidating child care programs and streamlining into one unified system compared to the two different systems and multiple different programs that we outlined at the beginning. 12-13 would be a transition year, merging the existing voucher-based programs into one block grant, and then in 13-14 moving the rest of the programs into funding to be administered by county welfare departments and the Department of Social Services rather than Department of Education. The exception being the Part Day state preschool program, which under the governor's proposal would stay with the Department of Ed. So turning to page 12 of the handout, we think there's a lot in the governor's proposal that does make sense. It is a complicated system right now. It does treat similar families differently and similar providers differently. This streamlining would treat similar families similarly and similar providers similarly. It would locate child care services as part of a larger continuum of social services housed with county welfare departments that offer a lot of other services, so may be able to help families tap into some of those other services in a more streamlined way, improve coordination. But we do have some specific recommendations we'd make, some modifications to this proposal we think are important. The first being, I referenced this earlier, there's a large chunk of our state preschool program that is funded through the general child care program budget. There was a consolidation done through a bill by Assemblymember Jones several years ago that let contractors merge these monies at the local level, and we have created a large state preschool program at the local level that we still budget as two separate items at the state level. So as part of the governor's proposal, he's preserving the Part Day state preschool funding within Proposition 98. It's about $350 million. But the other half of our existing state preschool program, about $400 million on the general child care, is in non-Proposition 98 funding right now. And as part of the governor's proposal, would then be realigned to a voucher program to be run by counties. So I think there's a lot of questions of what would this mean for our existing state preschool program on the ground. So our suggestion would be, if you would like to preserve that state preschool program, research shows that those ages, school readiness is activities are perhaps most important for 3 and 4-year-olds, that rather than kind of splitting that program in half and moving half of it into voucher, you preserve the state preschool program existing as it is today. So that would mean taking $400 million from the non-98 side and putting it into Proposition 98 to accurately reflect the existing preschool program. Now, that'd be a cost-neutral move to start with. Then you can make reductions from there based on the budget savings that you need to get. We'd also recommend, if this shift were to occur to the county welfare departments, putting them in charge of the voucher-based program, that you maintain the child care funding as a separate block grant rather than having it merged as part of the single allocation CalWORKs program, to make sure that the amount of funding and services you want for child care really do get spent on child care, and to make sure there are still services available for non-CalWORKs families. I think you heard quite a bit in your public testimony about the quality improvement activities that are currently housed with the Department of Education, and some concern that if those activities shifted to DSS, would some of the educational component be lost? So we'd recommend that the legislature stay really involved in that, and which projects that are currently underway make sense, are effective. Let's take a look at them, and let's make sure that the Department of Ed still has a role where appropriate. We don't think that most other states administer their child care programs through their social service agencies, and many are very well respected with very high quality activities and projects. So we don't think that in and of itself means that we would lose that. We just need to be vigilant about it. And then finally, on the issue of preschool, we would recommend looking at services for 4-year-olds holistically, and what's the best way to target services to needy 4-year-olds. Looking at this existing state preschool program, the piece that's in 98 and the piece that's out of 98, but also looking at the transitional kindergarten program, which is also to serve 4-year-olds, and just considering those together, given limited resources, what's the best way to target services to needy 4-year-olds before they start kindergarten. So as part of that, we would recommend adopting the governor's proposal not to fund the new transitional kindergarten program that funds services at the K-12 funding rate, creates a new program for kids regardless of need, either income need or parent working need, and only based on their birth month, and instead look at our existing state preschool program and prioritize slots there for children who may be displaced by the kindergarten date change, and again, focusing limited resources on the kids who need those school readiness services the most.
Thank you, Ms. Ehlers. A brief question here. You heard the public testimony and some of the concerns about the restructuring independent of the cuts. Do you think your suggestions here, these first 3 ideas, would probably mitigate a lot of the concerns if they had understood that this would be incorporated into the restructuring?
Right. Our state preschool program, from its 2 different funding sources right now, is 80% of the kids in our Title V centers. So if you were to preserve that, now you then may need to make some reductions to slots based on your resources, but in terms of our Title V regulations and requirements and those kind of high-quality programs, that would preserve 80% of those. So it does raise the question of the piece of the Title V centers that serve infant toddler care, which would be outside, and I think that merits some consideration. It's only 15,000 kids who are funded through that right now, but there is no guarantee that the programmatic requirements in those centers would be maintained.
And then, as you pointed out, the concern of the threat of loss of education, you address also in your third point.
Right. I mean, our voucher programs, just because the Department of Education is sending the funding down right now, that doesn't necessarily mean there's an education component to that right now. Right. They are running these projects, quality improvement projects, that can touch all kinds of programs. So I think it's a good chance for the state to take another look at how are we using those dollars? Are they effective? Which projects make sense? Which don't? What's the best way to do them? And having DSS as the lead agency doesn't preclude continuing and improving our quality efforts.
Great. Very good. So we'll move back to the administration. And as we did this morning, maybe a good starting point for you to give us some comments with regard to these alternative options that the LAO has offered us, and rise to the defense of the more stringent work requirements as to why you went in that direction as opposed to the alternative?
Sure. I'll take a stab at this. So, LAO does raise some good points, and, we continue to review aspects of this proposal. I think, we'll consider some of those points. I think, but we will be looking at them certainly in light of our two priorities. What we're trying to do overall is, balance the budget, of course, and then also to, again, reprioritize the limited resources available for state-subsidized child care, prioritize them towards supporting work and aligning better with the CalWORKs program. So that's not to say there's not some room for looking at work requirements and things like that, to the extent some of these other activities may also be supporting work. So we'll continue to do that, and depending on decisions made for the May revise, we'll make adjustments as we feel are appropriate.
Okay. Colleagues, questions? All right. Thank you. Appreciate your participation today. And to our last panel, thank you for your patience with us. Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson, welcome back. Claire Ramsey with the Child Care Law Center is with us, as well as Daniela Scali from the Child Care, who is a child care recipient.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
As the panel takes its place, at the risk of being repetitive, I want to call out the superintendent yet again. Would have been easy for him to be anywhere else during the testimony over the last couple of hours. And what I noted was that he sat and he listened and took note, and I want to recognize and acknowledge and express appreciation for that. It's the kind of collaboration between the legislative and constitutional officers that I think the public would like to see more of, and I certainly appreciate it. So thank you.
Appropriate comment. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Appreciate Senator Simitian's comment. And truly, the testimony was eloquent, heartrending, passionate, and logical in so many respects. So it was well worth the while to hear it firsthand. Thank you again for having this kind of a detailed hearing and focus on such an important part of the budget. I come to you today to thank you for the work that you've done, the legislature has done, this committee in the past, despite the budget crises of the past few years, the work you've done to preserve California's decades-long commitment to early learning. Year after year, the legislature has served as the last line of defense for California's youngest and most vulnerable children. And despite the painful cuts that have been made to these programs, your work has kept in place the infrastructure of these programs and the vital connection between child care and early learning. You've recognized that children at the start of their lives deserve more than just a safe and clean place with Elmo and Barney to wait while their parents work. They also deserve a chance to learn and to grow. And that's why I'm here to urge you to reject the administration's child care proposals. Because unless you do so, all the work that you have done until now to preserve California's commitment to quality child care and early learning will be lost. The administration's budget proposal simply does not acknowledge the fundamental role quality child care and early learning play in a child's future and the future of the entire state. In fact, I find myself surprised that we're even having this conversation, that this is even up for debate. The administration's child care proposal takes two fundamental steps towards dismantling California's high-quality child care system. First, the magnitude and design of the cuts that have been proposed would simply break many of the small businesses that form this critical infrastructure of service providers. These programs have already been severely cut, as you well know, losing nearly $890 million in funding over the past 4 years. This proposal, as you well know, would cut deeply more, another $500 million. Our estimates are still up at 60,000 children to 65,000 children are at risk of losing services under the proposed cuts. The cumulative impact of these cuts since 2008 amount to somewhere between 38 and 42% loss of state funding for childcare. Previous cuts have left more than 100,000 children unserved annually, and that's on top of the 200,000 that were on the eligibility list in 2010 before the list was eliminated. The second big problem beyond the proposed cuts to the programs is the equally misguided proposal to divorce child care from child development and early learning. This proposal flies in the face of literally decades of research into the benefits of strong early childhood education programs. One new study, for instance, and you know there are many, it shows that adults who participated in a high-quality early childhood education program in the 1970s are still benefiting from their early experience in a range of positive ways. Everyone from business leaders to law enforcement, neuroscientists to teachers agrees on the inherent and long-term value of these programs. And it's really a simple choice as I see it. Invest in kids early and reap the rewards of a better educated, more productive workforce and a healthier state, or pay the price later with more high school dropouts and more young people headed for trouble. What the administration has offered is realignment for realignment's sake, with nothing to show for it and plenty to lose. There is no cost savings that I see. In fact, both the administration's proposal and the LAO's create a risk of higher administrative costs. And the administration's proposal would cost $35 million this year in upfront new administrative costs for county readiness before the realignment even starts. And there's no long-term policy rationale. We already have a strong local system carrying out this work. Why would we cast a successful local system aside in favor of another inexperienced one and spend $35 million to do it in the process? Why would we be willing to turn our back on the decades of commitment and proven research? Why are we having a debate over whether our children can have either a clean, safe care place or can be prepared for success in our schools? Why not both if the investment in tax dollars is the same? For decades, our early learning and child care system has been a model for the nation. These programs are a model because they are based on the findings of the very best research, which demonstrates that quality early learning programs where teachers are well-trained, curriculum is carefully developed, and partnerships exist between our California Department of Education and local providers. These programs make a real difference that lasts a child's whole life. What we do to the current state program sets a bar that raises the quality of care for all children in child care in California. Why would we change course now and devolve our nation's leading programs and miss this critical opportunity to prepare our kids for success? Why do this now and chop the program into 58 pieces? To do so would be wrong, short-sighted. It would just be the wrong direction. And as it was summed up earlier by Senator Simitian, it was less help for fewer children, and we would add with lower quality. I urge you to reject this proposal because it's not an answer to California's comprehensive budget and CalWORKs problems. I do understand the financial emergency we are all face, and that no program can be held harmless. I understand the desire to improve workforce participation in CalWORKs and that child care can be part of that solution. I stand here ready to help you craft an effective alternative that builds on our high-quality and diverse system and addresses California's current challenges. My department is ready to work with you and the field to achieve these goals. But let's not set aside decades of research, decades of commitment to California's children, and years of work by this legislature to preserve and improve early learning opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Can't contain them, just can't contain them. You've been very clear on your thoughts on the governor's proposed restructuring. Do you have any thoughts on where we might turn to? And I'm not going to suggest that you offer us a dollar amount of how deep we have to cut. We all know there will be some cuts, and we're going to try and mitigate it as much as we possibly can, have to find them somewhere else, since our revenue options are not even few. They're non-existent. So the governor's main proposals being the work requirements, the income ceilings, and the voucher rates, and then the LAO offering up the additional possibilities of age limits, parent fees, and time limits. Do you have any suggestions as to where we might turn? And do you have the same opinion of the work requirements as the LAO, that that's really something we have to turn away from, even if it's going to cost a couple $100 million?
I don't have all the answers, and we'll look at all the choices that the LAO's laid out, and obviously it's a heart-rending and gut-wrenching process that the field will also have to go through and trying to sum up and focus on what priorities are. I do believe it would be detrimental to see our higher education link with the child care support helping many families get on their feet. We heard the testimony of so many people who saved their lives and put their family on a trajectory towards success on a long-term basis, emerging out of welfare to permanent contribution to our society. So I think there'd be a big problem there. I'm also worried about, again, the child care programs at our community colleges being dismantled, both as a quality training ground as well as a quality example of child care in California. But we'll look at those numbers, and I'll ask if Aaron Gable would add something additional, my ledge chief, who's looked at this more deeply.
Thank you, Ms. Gable.
If I might just add one quick piece, regardless of the decisions the legislature has before you around how you define the workforce participation rates for the state, the superintendent, as he noted earlier, does believe that child care, the families that are a part of our child care system, can be part of the solution, looking at how we collect information on workforce participation rates. But of course, we don't have a current system in place at the local level that would allow us to collect this information in a statewide and organized fashion. So one of the pieces of an alternative that we would love to work with the legislature on is how to utilize those local systems of care that we currently have and the eligibility work that they already do very well and take very seriously to help meet the WPR reporting requirements, if that is a choice that the legislature makes.
Thank you.
And that might be done, we're asking the field to assess their capacity to do that with all the cutbacks they've already endured, but that might still be able to be done at the field level and help accumulate that information, which would get us higher towards those workforce participation goals.
Right. Colleagues? If not, we will move to Ms. Ramsey, and we're going to save Ms. Scally for our conclusion.
Thank you for having me this afternoon. I'm Claire Ramsey from the Child Care Law Center, and I speak to you today on behalf of our clients, which are low-income parents and child care providers throughout the state. And we're really here to offer sort of two perspectives. As the LAO mentioned, there's really the cuts and there's the restructuring, so I'm going to talk about each briefly. But first and foremost, we really urge this body to reject the cuts that have been proposed and the policy changes that come with them. Specifically, you just asked about the work, changing this into more of a work support program and away from educational and support for parents doing multiple vocational trainings and other trainings. And we disagree with that move, and we believe that it should be used to support parents across a spectrum of work. But we also don't want to lose the idea that this child care cuts, it affects parents, but it really affects children as well, and that education is a part of this child care budget. And when we take away supports from parents for all sorts of reasons, because they're in training, they're at work, we're taking away supports from children as well. So we don't want to lose that human connection to those cuts. We also are concerned about the depth and level of what those welfare cuts would do in terms of reducing it to a welfare to work only or a welfare working program only, because it would just take such a big cut out of the number of children who are currently being served. We also are concerned about what it would do for infant and toddler care. It is expensive care to start with. It is already in short supply, and it would make it harder for parents who had infants and toddlers who wanted to better themselves, who wanted to achieve success and self-sufficiency, if they could not be supported in their efforts. We would also like to say that the rate reductions are really pushing on a system that is already strained beyond belief for child care providers. Most of these child care providers, or many of them I should say, are low income themselves. They are often women, run small businesses, and they rely on a system, the state supports the system, and they rely on that system as well. And so we're not going to only be hurting low-income parents and families, we're going to be hurting low-income working women who are supporting this child care system that we've created in our state. We're also concerned about the cuts to the centers. Our centers are an amazing network throughout the state, and we really feel that it's a quality example that California has always been proud of. And now if we're going to slash rates even further, what I hear from the field all the time is they can barely stay open with the rates they have. And as was pointed out earlier, those rates are often below the regional market rates, especially in high-cost counties. And if we're going to slash 10% off those rates, we're really going to be creating a system where there are not centers for parents to go to. So we ask that you reject these cuts and the policy changes that would go with them. And then I also wanted to address the restructuring. Child Care Law Center is not taking a position on whether or not the program should be moved to DSS or stay with the Department of Education right now, because partially we don't have enough details to understand what all this restructuring would mean in practice. But I think what we care about are sort of two fundamental pillars that we think support childcare, and that is access to care and quality of care. And both are equally important, and in any restructuring proposal, we would want to see both preserved and kept strong. So some thoughts about access for working parents. We certainly can acknowledge that we have a very complicated childcare system. It's probably more complicated than it needs to be, and that there is work to be done simplifying, streamlining, and creating a better experience for families and children when they access the system. We also want to recognize that the system should provide for multiple doors of entries for families, and that families should feel comfortable with the points of access. And there are lots of ways to do that, but we want to let families have a place where there's cultural competencies, where there's family-friendly policies, where parents can get help in multiple languages. And right now, there are a lot of people working to make that system work in California currently. And then we also want to see the potential and access for aligning with other types of programs. So the health portal that's about to go online in 2014 really creates opportunities to streamline and to look at systems and to say, these are a lot of different systems that families that make a certain income can access. How can we make those as seamless and workable for families as possible? So those are all the types of points we want to see addressed on the access side. On the other side, we don't want to forget about quality, and we don't want to suggest it's any less important than access. We believe that quality is of the utmost importance. These are our children that we're talking about, and no parent wants to take their child to a low-quality center, to a low-quality child care, to leave their kid in an unsafe position. So we want the state to keep and support quality educational settings for children that improve their educational, social, emotional, and physical development. We would like to sustain quality improvements and promote higher quality early education experiences for low-income children. We want to provide children with continuity of care. One of the proposals that wasn't mentioned here yet today, but has to do with parents getting 30 days of child care while looking for work in a 6-month period. And I think that just fundamentally misunderstands how child care both works, because who can access child care for 1 month and then pull their kid out? That's not really a system, and that's not how it works. And also, how is a kid supposed to get an educational benefit out of 30 days of care and then being pulled out and maybe taken to someone else or left in another place or with other people? That's not best for our children. We also want to support a wide range of possibilities for family. You know, the federal law wants parents to have choice, and we want parents to have choice as well. Some parents are going to prefer a center, some a family child care home, some a license-exempt provider, and we think the system should support all those options. We'd also like to continue the quality that comes from the diversity of our system. So we have part-day preschool, we have Head Start programs that work with, although they're federally funded, work with our state programs. We have other programs like nutrition programs that add value to our programs, and we want to keep and foster those collaborations. And finally, we'd like to support a high-quality workforce because, you know, we want there to be teacher training standards. We know the Department of Education has done a ton of work around creating standards and improving teacher quality, and we want to acknowledge and respect all the work that's been done both around teacher quality and around standards and foundations for children as well by the department. So in closing, I think what we really want to say is that the restructuring proposal as it sits has a lot of detail missing, so we want to know what the detail is, but we also want to use this point in time to say there are improvements to be made in the system, and let's use this time to make meaningful, useful improvements to the system that hopefully will streamline and create efficiencies for families and a better experience while preserving the good things about our system and the quality of care and the access for children. And so thank you, and if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ramsey. I'd like to ask you a question similar to that which I asked the superintendent. If it's a fact we're going to have to make some cuts, your opinion of the LAO's suggestion that we look at age limits, time limits, parent fees, as opposed to this very significant wage requirement change? If you could compare the two, which direction might you suggest we turn?
Thank you. And like the superintendent, I can't simply say pick package A over package B. I think both have a lot of problems with them. And, you know, I do want to put on record, even though it might not be popular in this room, is that, you know, this system has borne a lot of cuts over the last number of years.
You get no disagreement from anyone here.
I appreciate that. And so, you know, as much as any cuts to these programs can be minimized, that is first and foremost what we ask for. I would like to point out that, as it was mentioned by the LAO's office, is that, you know, things like charging families higher fees or cutting their eligibility, I mean, we are really talking about, we're splitting hairs about how low income these families are. I mean, these are low income people in a state that has high unemployment and has a lot of expensive areas and counties to, you know, reside in. And so it's really, I think, untenable for families to have to bear the brunt of these costs, whether it's actually dollars coming out of their pockets to pay higher family fees or restrictions on, you know, who can actually access the child care system. So our perspective, the more the cuts can be minimized to families and on low-income families, the better. And, you know, I would also say that we have to look at what's not going to collapse the system we have when it comes to cuts. So, you know, if we're looking at rates and we're going to basically, it may sound like 10%, oh, it's only 10%, but if it's going to collapse the whole system of child care, then it's really a much bigger problem. So I would ask that the legislature really minimize cuts that are going to sort of undermine the system that we have and basically place families in this untenable position where they can't even access a system that exists because they can't pay a family fee. They can't, you know, a provider can't accept the rates anymore and just will say no to a voucher. So I'm sorry I can't answer it more specifically.
No, that's helpful. That is helpful. Thank you. Colleagues? Our last speaker is Daniela Scally, so we can get a little real-life experience here. I understand you are a child care recipient.
I am.
Welcome.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, welcome, and thank you for giving us your day.
Thank you. I did have a handout passed around. I'll read through my statement if you can really just try to focus on my charts that I provided. And
your beautiful children.
Thank you. They are precious. And they are the ones that are affected by all of this more than I will be. So I do have 3 children, a 13-year-old son and 4-year-old twins. At 19, I was homeless and a single mother on welfare. Thankfully, I was able to turn to the CalWORKs program for help. After being on welfare for about a year, I started working 2 jobs and eventually got a place I could call home, a car, and most importantly, my self-esteem back. For the past, well, actually for over 5 years now, I've worked as a full-time contract administrator and HR generalist for a local landscaping company. I also go to school full-time at night online, and I'll be graduating this summer with honors with an associate's degree in business.
Congratulations.
I'm proud of these accomplishments and how far I've come, but I sit here before you today at risk of losing it all. As a low-income working parent, I truly live check to check, and there are times that my kids have had to go without because of it. Like many of the people in this room, I work 40 hours a week. The difference is what I earn doesn't give me enough to make ends meet. There are times I have ran out of food before my next check has come in and had to go to food banks to feed my kids. My 13-year-old son was not able to go on his 6th grade class trip last year because the cost was $300. He's already made fun of because he doesn't have the cool clothes and the cool shoes, and now I had to tell him he couldn't go on his trip either. The hurt on his face was horrible. This is only one of the sacrifices he has made over the last 13 years due to the lack of wages on my part. As a mother, you want to give your child everything, but despite how hard I'm working, it's just never enough. Childcare is the only thing that has allowed me to continue to work. But once again, I stand to lose the very childcare that I need. I currently pay approximately $300 a month towards my childcare cost. And as you see attached is a chart, if it was any higher, I would be forced to quit. New proposed cuts to income eligibility would completely terminate my childcare because I am considered higher income. I would go from paying $300 a month to over $1,500 a month for my childcare. I simply would not be able to afford it. So by following all of the rules, progressing forward in my job, and arriving steps away from economic security, these proposed cuts would actually punish me for doing everything right and put me back at square one because losing my childcare will force me to quit my job and go back on welfare. I would just like to point out, they had all their numbers that they laid out and great, but the reality of it is, if you lower that SMI any lower, I will be terminated, and I will go back on welfare, and I will be required to get a minimum wage paying job. I will no longer pay $300 towards my child care. I will no longer pay any state taxes, but you will still be paying the full cost of child care for my kids. So it really doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't understand why we aren't thinking outside the box and taking everything into consideration with this. For the past 2 years, I have been on the worst roller coaster ride of my life. It seems like every few months, my lifeline being childcare is back on the chopping block. Emotionally and physically, I'm drained. Working and going to school full-time does not leave much room for anything else, but I have no choice but to advocate because without my childcare, I don't work and I don't go to school. A common stereotype of someone utilizing any kind of assistance is that they are lazy and just want a handout, when in actuality, it is exactly the opposite. I worked 2 jobs, spent several hours a day on the bus getting back and forth to work to get out of poverty. I have lived with no electricity and not known how I was going to feed the kids at night. My day starts at 6 a.m. I get home at 5. By the time I cook dinner, do baths, do homework with the kids, and then do my own homework, it's after 10 o'clock at night. I have horrible anxiety when I think about the possibility of doing all of this just to end back in poverty. If I lose my childcare, that's where I will be in a matter of 2 months. I don't have savings. I don't have family. It's just me and my kids. My employer was extremely supportive of my time of advocating last year for childcare, but I do not want to go to them again and tell them it's starting all over. I have no PTO left, and who wants to employ somebody who is a financial burden to them? As human resources for my company, I understand what I am putting them through. Even though it's no fault of my own, it's no fault of theirs either. My 13-year-old son did not receive the child care that my twins have. I had to leave him with whoever was willing to watch him while I went to school or work. One incident, he was hit during a domestic altercation between the babysitter and her boyfriend. Another one, the babysitter wasn't paying attention. He pulled down an iron on his arm and has a permanent scar. These are only a couple of examples of what can happen when kids are left in unsafe environments. Because my 13-year-old did not have the quality child care experience, he was held back and did not start kindergarten until he was 6 years old. He didn't start talking until he was almost 3, and he now has behavioral problems that I attribute to the first 3 years of his life. Because of the child care and preschooling my 4-year-old twins have, they are ready for kindergarten and have been for the last year. It is time for the legislator to realize that child care is a detrimental down payment in the life of a child and stop using them as pawns in the budget process. Republicans and Democrats need to come together and invest in our future by allocating the necessary funds to child care and safety net programs and seek revenue solutions instead. These programs have helped me to secure a decent future, and I hope that all of you will fight to reject the cuts. These programs give us hope that poverty is not a life sentence. When the CalWORKs program and its work and educational supports like childcare are fully funded, the program works, and I am a testament to that. Thank you. I'm sorry. Can I say one more thing that I would just like to point out?
Of course.
They said that the current 70% SMI level is about $3,500 a month for a family. That is before taxes. After taxes, I am at $2,600, and I am at about 68% of the poverty level. So you need to take into account that I'm not getting $3,500, even though that's what I'm being based on. Please reject that cut.
Thank you. We are very fortunate to have you and your story, your testimony with us today, and your children are certainly very fortunate to have you as their mother. So we thank you. We wish you very well, and please be certain that you'll be in our minds as we make these very difficult decisions.
Thank you, and please be certain that I will be back.
Somehow I don't doubt that. Senator Hancock.
I just have to echo Senator Leno's remarks. You are one awesome woman. And thank you for being here today. And I thank the superintendent also for being here and for his ongoing, consistent concern. I wish that everyone in California could hear your story. And I just want to say you put it together so well. I think you should consider having it as an op-ed in some of our local papers. People don't really have a human face like they should of what we're really talking about. And I would ask the administration to, again, as we were talking this morning, to factor in for us what is the conception of what is to happen to families like this, just in crass economic terms, having them unable to pay taxes, unable to hold down jobs, unable to do things that in the long run would be much more financially beneficial to the state of California, let alone your courage and tenacity in keeping going with all this.
Yes, Superintendent.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, and Daniela's eloquent testimony reminded me of two other things to underscore. One,
please.
Both related to the LAO's comments more than to the administration's comments. We understand that the system today is not perfect, and it could use some streamlining and work. And again, that's what I meant when we stand ready to work with you and your staff and our staff to how to make it more logical, easier access, continue to build quality. The second thing that Daniela's testimony underscored was school readiness. It's beyond 3 and 4 year olds. It goes to birth, infant, toddler stage, to pre-K. The transitional kindergarten stage through the continuum of education is there, and one of the things that realignment does is it breaks that continuum. And the blueprint for great schools, which I've given everybody here in the Senate panel a copy of, one of our main plans was to access through the programs that we currently run those parents and help their child be more ready for school. Everything from a literacy campaign and literacy programs to healthy eating to English learners getting oriented and ready and getting their vocabulary stronger, all the way from that infant toddler stage to transitional kindergarten and ready for school. So I believe, again, that the current system allows for that continuum to grow, and the potential of having higher education value and readiness for school is enormous, and we haven't even tapped its full potential yet.
Thank you. If there are no other comments or questions from the committee, we thank you all for giving us your time and expertise. And we have concluded our longer than expected agenda, but it's been very valuable. This is, of course, just an overview hearing. Our budget subcommittees will be diving even deeper into the details of the governor's proposals, both in terms of the suggested cuts and also policy changes. And so consider this just the beginning of our conversation. And thank you all for participating. We are adjourned. Senator Simitian, before we are adjourned.
Before we are adjourned, Mr. Chairman, I just want to express my personal thanks to you for the gracious and inclusive way you incorporated public testimony with a very difficult agenda. I thought it was important, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you all.